the progenitor, the cosmic blade, the light of the universe, the sun god. All of that meant nothing to Emperor Helios as he contemplated the star map of the galaxy he controlled. A slight twinge in his upper shoulder as he manipulated the star map caused him to wince as an echo of remembered pain filtered through his mind, an unwelcome memory of his failure against the entity that had challenged his rule. Helios slammed his fist down on the arm of his massive throne, widening the few cracks that had been building over the last few cycles. He had originally torn apart dozens of commanders in his rage after resuming his physical presence in his palace. Unfortunately, their subservience and acceptance of their deaths was almost an affront to his peace of mind, so he had stopped after a while. To utterly destroy them so easily, in contrast to his efforts to annihilate the entity that had caused him so many problems, brought no easement to his anger. To say that his campaign against his opponent was a complete failure would be going a bit far. The trap had been laid, and the entity had fallen for it, devoting resources and time to feeding and protecting a veritable handful of planets, all while the Emperor's forces developed dimensional dampeners to inhibit any ability to escape. His servants utterly destroyed every living person on every planet held in protection by the entity, even as he confronted his enemy personally, which was where it had all gone wrong. The Emperor had believed that nothing could hurt him because he was invincible, as had been the case for thousands of years, but he had been proven sorely wrong. After being tricked by the entity into destroying what, as he learned afterward, was an unstable sub-full-site reactor, the resulting explosion shredded his invulnerable barrier for a nanosecond, ripping off his right arm in the process, before flinging him thousands of light-years away in an uncontrolled tumble of painful disorientation. Millions of his servants' ships were destroyed in the process, but his own somehow survived to eventually pick up his tumbling and injured body. Once aboard, a lengthy process of healing and regrowing his missing arm was initiated. Unfortunately, replacing his limbs wasn't as simple or easy as it was for his servants. The body of a god was sacred and complex, and it required the willing sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of commanders to even begin the process. They were born of his flesh, and so to his flesh they returned. During his convalescence, he learned of the events following the explosion. While millions of his servants' ships were destroyed, that was of no real consequence. What hadn't been destroyed, as far as the information he had access to revealed, was the space station that the entity had been controlling. The explosion had apparently damaged it in a way that resulted in it no longer having any type of trackable energy signature, and it had been blown away so far and so fast that it was impossible to determine where it went. In other words, the entity had escaped the retribution he had intended for it, and that made him angry. There was the possibility that he had ended up killing his opponent in the explosion, but until he saw the evidence to that fact, he didn't believe it. One side effect of his injury and the non-defeat of his enemy, along with the destruction of millions of ships and the sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of commanders, was something that hadn't occurred in thousands of years. Rebellion. The messaging sent out by the entity and those with him had somehow become a force in and of itself, energizing tens of thousands of worlds all around the galaxy. While the reduction in his servants due to everything that had happened was relatively small in comparison to how many were out there, the smaller number of them in certain portions of the galaxy was evidently felt. As such, the slaves under his rule began to fight back with very little retaliation. At least for a short time. It wasn't long until the Emperor was able to get a handle on the situation and absolutely crush every planet that had rebelled, wiping them from existence without mercy. The frequency of rebellions popping up had diminished rapidly after that, though unlike just a few years ago, it was never nil. His servants were constantly hunting down any presence of disobedience and eliminating it immediately, though there always seemed to be more popping up every other minute.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it. at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.